I'm very pleased to have Mark Lane with me today. Mark joined our Pride webinar a few weeks ago, talking about how different brands were going to be discussing and honoring Pride amidst COVID. A week prior to our Pride webinar, the Black Lives Matter movement really was amplified as a result of the murder of George Floyd. And so we shifted the conversation to also be about intersectionality. And Mark offered so many insights to not only what Barclays is doing, but what comms leaders are doing throughout this time. And so I ideated this conversation because I've seen and heard and read from many comms leaders during this time about the need for nuanced language, particularly during this time. So not only can brands get away with obviously blanket statements, but really having to put their money where their mouth is, really having to make sure that in every aspect of their business, they're exemplifying movements, exemplifying pride, exemplifying what it means to live and exist during a pandemic. And so excited to have Mark here, who leads global corporate comms for Barclays Banking. So Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you for the invite, Garrison. It's good to be back with you. We've got lots to talk about.
Yeah, so I guess to kick us off, what, as a comms leader, have you seen change the most in the last 3 months? And then again, probably in the last few weeks. How have things changed for you?
So things have changed a lot. I mean, I was talking to somebody earlier today about, where we were in, say, December and then January. I was saying, I went on a vacation with some friends in the middle of February, and it was really the week after that that I came back to the office and things really started kicking off with COVID. And that was, that was crazy, right? It was, we sort of didn't see it coming, and it escalated so quickly. And so that, I think, for everybody was a bit of a scramble, right? We were really struggling a bit to sort of keep up with the, the demands of, rapidly changing requirements from local governments, advice from WHO and CDC, sort of working out the different levels of advice between the different governments around the world. We obviously have operations in a whole bunch of different countries, and then the sort of differences between all the different states in the US. It was really a challenge to keep up with that, even for an organization with the resources like Barclays. Once we got into a steady groove on that, it's the sort of lessons that we learned in that period, or that were reinforced, were like, you need to listen to what colleagues want to hear from the organization, right? The most important thing that you can tell colleagues is that, your sole focus in terms of having people in the workplace is keeping them safe and keeping them healthy, and doing everything that you can to guarantee that, from physical security through mental health, and through the issues that we all dealt with during the sort of COVID outbreak earlier this year. So we pivoted a lot to provide sort of not only messaging from a sort of global level that came from my headquarters in London, but also adapting that so that people felt that senior management in the region, the Americas CEO, the Americas head of human resources, were really paying attention to the needs on the ground. The situation in New York was not the same as the situation in San Francisco, was not the same as the situation in London. So being able to sort of pivot quickly and tell people that you were aware of the, the situation that they personally were going through, depending on where they lived, was very important. More recently, the dialogue has shifted very much again. I've had so many conversations during this month about racism, systemic racism, the difference between racism in the US and in the UK, the very specific background and history to racism in the US that impacts everybody's lives on a daily basis, in terms of the language that we use, in terms of the headlines that we read, in terms of the flags that we see flying. I say this as a Brit who's lived in the US for 12 years now. It's just a very different situation here in the US. And the word of the month is intersectionality, right? You can't have a conversation really about Pride or any other sort of commemorative event without thinking about how that sort of intersects with the Black community in the US and what the Black community has been through. So as I was saying to you before everybody joined, Garrison, I do count myself lucky to work for an organization where senior management puts a lot of value on culture. And a lot of that culture is built by showing that senior leaders care about individuals, they care about the diversity of the organization, and we really do put a lot of value on having a diverse team of people that can respond to our customers and clients in ways that we wouldn't be able to do if it was all middle-aged white men at the table.
I can imagine for a global company like Barclays, there may be times in the past, or maybe times even now, where there's this national or this natural hesitancy when publishing something, or maybe like hoops that you kind of have to go through before rolling something out. I think one of the things that this crisis has demanded, both the pandemic, both the conversation around systemic racism, is that time is not allowed. You have to respond quickly. You have to be very top of mind. You have to be agile enough to change at the drop of a hat. How has that experience been? Has it forced Barclays as a brand to have to respond to things a little bit faster, or because you have that leadership in place that is really accepting and wanting to be culture first and human first, has that been an easy transition? Because we've heard a lot from marketers throughout this conference around how they've had to change the way in which they roll things out, because marketing can sometimes be reactive instead of proactive. So curious on the corporate comm side, how you're experiencing that because of how quick everything's moving and everything's happening.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing for us has been making sure that we listen to what our colleagues are telling us, and making sure that we listen to enough colleagues that we can get a sense of what's happening within the organization. It's not okay to just listen to one person and react to that one individual. You have to get the full range of views. In terms of actually getting stuff out the door, like getting stuff onto the internet, getting an email into somebody's inboxes, I will say that I think Barclays is a pretty nimble organization of being able to get that stuff done. Comms has built a good reputation at Barclays for delivering stuff that is strategic and commercial and reflective of what colleagues want to hear from the organization, and that has enabled us to move pretty quickly. So for me, if I think about sort of some of the stuff that I put out over the past couple of weeks, I work directly with the Americas CEO or with other business leaders, and I can get an announcement out here within a couple of hours if I need to. Like, we move really, really quickly. But the most important thing is making sure that it's not just sort of the basic content of the message. It's about the tone. It's about the words that you use. It's about recognizing that every single word in the stuff that you're putting out matters. The wrong word can have a scary impact on sort of your reputation as a leader, on the way that people associate with the organization, the way that people feel engaged. And the moment you make one word can change the destiny of a senior leader, and that's that's down to comms leaders in this environment. So it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we're paying attention to all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, tone is something that's very top of mind right now, I'm sure, for many people. And the fact that there's a lot of different things happening, that I think you're probably always having to shift your tone a little bit. If you look at last year's Pride corporate comms to this year's Pride, I'm sure there is a different tone that's being considered and or acknowledged when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement and the need to combat systemic racism. That's obviously a very nuanced subject matter. And so making sure that you're striking the right tone, and shifting that tone and not just having it be kind of one note, I'm sure is something that is very top of mind for you. So how are you in a world where we're all moving quickly and have to kind of respond in the moment, and want to respond as quickly as possible? How are you also making sure that you're centering for the tone and making sure that the tone is appropriate and right during this time?
It's really about, for me, demonstrating how you want other people to act within the organization. So I'll give some more concrete examples on this. You know, when we all watched with horror the story unfold around George Floyd's death, that conversation ignited very quickly. You know, it obviously became very political, and you know, it was difficult as a white person to sit there at the table and try and give advice, right? You never want to be the person that's sitting there lecturing from a position of sort of no understanding or background. And so, you know, I spent a lot of time listening to Black colleagues during that time. I spent a lot of time talking through ideas and stories about pride, and about what the Black community has gone through, and found ways that we can give real tangible examples about the intersectionality between those two parts of our community. And you know, I worked very closely with the America's CEO, who is a very visible leader, obviously, within the organization. He's very closely aligned. He's in fact the regional executive sponsor of our Black Professionals Network. He's also done several events for our LGBT employee resources group. And so, you know, I worked with him to get out a bunch of messages, and we made sure that the order of those messages to different sections of the colleague base went out in the right order. He spent time to listen to feedback on each of those messages when we sent them out. I proposed to him the idea that we hosted an event looking at the intersectionality between Pride and the Black community. We hosted that event on Juneteenth. And, you know, as he and I were talking about the messages that I thought he should deliver in that event, you know, I asked him to say things like Black Lives Matter. I asked him to say things like, you know, white privilege. And some of those words for leaders can be uncomfortable. But I think they're important to say in the sort of environment that we're in right now, where the dialogue really does have to be about understanding the privileges that a lot of us were born with that we've not paid enough attention to. And so, you know, as a comms leader, as I say, for me, it's about pushing the boundaries on what people feel comfortable with, so that when colleagues receive that communication or hear that person speaking, they really do understand that they're very serious when they say, this matters to me personally, because the way they're going to demonstrate that is to say the things that make them feel slightly uncomfortable. And it's in that sort of zone of discomfort that we all, you know, evolve as individuals, and we will learn.
Absolutely. And I'm sure as a global company, Barclays also has an opportunity to educate through corporate comms. And I think even your lens as an immigrant probably required some unique education on your part for like the history of systemic racism through the United States history, and through kind of that conversation. But I'm sure as a global company, Barclays also wants to make sure that they're sharing a message with also the needed background and the needed kind of education to understand the scope of the conversation. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of that comes from making sure that you're educated, right? Go out there and make sure that the stuff that you're using as education is accurate. Make sure it's not, you know, politicized in any way. Verify it with people from the community that you're talking about. You know, for me, it was really important to share the messages from our senior leaders in advance with key people in the Black community, like Black leaders within Barclays, within every single organization, are great resources in terms of we want to make sure that this tone is right. We want to hear what you're going through. It's that stuff that should inform the words and the channels through which our senior leaders are communicating.
And corporate comms sometimes has the kind of the nickname that it's like hyper messaged, or it kind of gets known for a hyper message lens. And you even spoke to a little bit before of kind of having to go through and make sure that different people sign off, different people check the box. How are you navigating authenticity during this time, and what would be your advice to people when it comes to making sure that something is messaged, something is thought through, something has had those certain types of leverages and certain people checking it, signing off, but also remains authentic, true to the company's values, and still reads as something that is meaningful? How do you balance those two, particularly at a time right now that requires so much nuance?
There's no magic answer to this one, but I would say when I'm writing stuff for senior leaders, when I'm giving them advice, make sure that the message that you want to communicate is one of the first things you say in the message. You don't want to bury the lead by having it, in the last sentence of the third paragraph in a 4-paragraph note. If you want to tell people that, your organization believes in the value of diversity and inclusion, and that racism and discrimination is unacceptable in any form, say that as your first words, right? There is beauty in having simple messages that don't muddy the waters in terms of what you're trying to communicate. So whereas everything, for me as a comms leader for a bank, right, everything you communicate has to show value in terms of the strategy, in terms of the commercial lens that you're using. You have to tie it back to what we're delivering for our customers and our clients. But beyond that, there's huge scope to communicate and demonstrate the value in what we're doing, right? It's for me really important to tie everything that you're doing around combating systemic racism to the value in what you're bringing to customers and clients. If you can draw that link and you can help people understand why it's important, then people can clearly see that you're not just doing this stuff because it's nice to have. It's a strategic imperative for us to make sure that we're putting more effort into hiring people with diverse backgrounds, hiring more Black individuals into the organization, finding more opportunities for Black individuals to get promotions, right? We don't want to walk into a pitch with our customers or clients with a wall of white men, right? That's never going to win the day. If we're able to walk in with, a rainbow of people of different backgrounds, that's when clients are going to say, Barclays really cares about this stuff, and diversity of perspectives and diversity of thought really do win the day.
Absolutely. And lastly, obviously a lot of industries are changing. We see everyone kind of dealing with not only this pandemic, but also this conversation around diversity and inclusion in a really meaningful way, I think, and a really and trying to challenge what the status quo is. So for you as a comms leader, what do you see these last 3 months? How do you see these last 3 months tying into the future of corporate comms? What has drastically changed that you think really excites you about the future of corporate comms, and maybe some more of the authenticity that has been created and the nuance that's been desired and required during this time?
So 2020 for me is a watershed moment, right? It was the year when, maybe this is a bold statement, but for me, it was the year when the US sort of wrapped its head around the fact that we live in a society that's racist and people get killed because of the color of their skin, and that's not okay. Right? The fact that we lose so many Black trans women each year in the US is horrifying. The fact that we lose anybody because of the color of their skin or of their gender identity, their sexual orientation, is not acceptable. And I think this was the year, as I say, that the US finally wrapped its head around it, and everybody across the world was equally horrified and is coming to grips with that as an issue as well. I think in the past, corporations had seen diversity and inclusion topics as a sort of bolt-on to human resources. It was a bolt-on to other stuff, right? Events that we hosted during Pride Month were, just during Pride Month, and they were really focused on what Pride is and is about. What I've seen very clearly happen at Barclays and at other organizations is that diversity and inclusion and these difficult topics are integrated into the business stuff. I was really quite surprised at how many conference calls I've attended over the past sort of month, where in the middle of the call, somebody has transitioned seamlessly from talking about the business to talking about the importance of the debate and the dialogue on racism. And seeing that integration way more, fully formed, I think it is the way forward. I'm personally delighted that a lot of people have done that themselves without needing somebody to help them get there. I think as comms leaders, we've always tried to sort of integrate all of the messages that we want people to hear into one place. But I think this is the year when it's finally really happened. And for me, I hope we never turn back, right? I don't think anybody wants to go back to to that fateful night when George Floyd was killed and witness that again. That's not okay. That's disgusting. And the fact that corporate leaders have an opportunity to push that arc of sort of evolution of humanity forward, this is the moment when we've got to take that and keep going.
Yeah, they say that there's two sides or two different types of entertainment. There's escapism, which is like pure joy. And then there's holding a mirror to society, which challenges the way in which we live or the way in which we formerly lived. Sure could look like if we keep down the path that we're on. And many people have said that the workplace has been that escapism. It's been that cold brew on tap. We're going to make your life as enjoyable as possible kind of culture driven mentality. And now this is our holding a mirror to society moment. And it's showing us not necessarily what America has become, but what America has always been. And I think this is now really a pivotal moment where the companies that get this right and correct course now will survive, and the companies that don't will fail. And I appreciate your candor and I appreciate your leadership. And I appreciate your friendship as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that Barclays is in good hands with you at the helm. So thank you so much, Mark. Safe travels and talk soon.
Thank you so much, Garrison.
Bye, Mark.